We've all been taught to fight for what we want in love, to show interest, to stay available, to be patient. But sometimes the most powerful move you can make isn't holding on, it's letting go. Not out of bitterness, not as a manipulation, but as a deep act of self-respect. Because when someone knows you'll always be there, they stop feeling the urgency to step up. But when you take a step back, not out of anger, but clarity, they're forced to feel the silence your absence creates. That silence says everything. It says, I'm no longer waiting for you to see my worth, I already know it. And in that space, something powerful happens. If he truly values you, he'll feel the shift and it will wake him up. This is where the dynamic changes. This is where he stops taking you for granted and starts realizing what he stands to lose. Because when you let go, that's often when he finally starts holding on. Letting go isn't about walking away with a dramatic exit or trying to make someone chase you by pulling back. It's about choosing your peace over someone else's potential. Too often, people confuse letting go with giving up, as if it's an act of weakness or surrender. But the truth is, letting go is one of the strongest, most empowering things you can do. It's the moment you stop trying to control the outcome and start choosing yourself. When you let go, what you're really doing is reclaiming your power. The power you gave away by waiting, overanalyzing, adjusting your needs, and sacrificing your emotional well-being for someone who hasn't met you halfway. It's the point where you stop outsourcing your value to how someone treats you and start owning it for yourself. When you're clinging to someone who is distant, inconsistent, or half-invested, your energy becomes heavy, it becomes needy. And that's not because you're weak, it's because you care. You want it to work. You see the potential. You believe if you just give a little more, hang in a little longer, love a little harder, things will shift. But all that effort starts to erode your sense of self. You begin editing your personality, holding back your feelings, justifying bad behavior, and calling it patience. And slowly, without realizing it, you lose sight of the very thing that made you attractive in the first place. Your wholeness. Letting go flips that script. It says, I love myself too much to keep bleeding for someone who won't even hand me a band-aid. It's a quiet revolution within you. It's no longer reacting every time he pulls away. It's no longer waiting by your phone for validation. It's no longer showing up for someone who doesn't show up for you. And the power of that shift is massive, because when you let go, your energy changes. You stop grasping, you stop chasing, you start standing. That kind of presence is felt. People can feel when they've lost access to the version of you who would bend over backward. They notice when your attention becomes unavailable, when your softness becomes sacred, when your time is no longer freely handed out like a flyer on the street. And for someone who took you for granted, that moment hits hard. It breaks the illusion that you'll always be there no matter how little they give. It forces them to sit in the silence of your absence and ask themselves why you're no longer chasing them. And if there's any real depth of feeling on their part, that silence becomes a wake-up call. But here's the beautiful part. Letting go isn't really about whether he wakes up or not. It's about whether you do. Whether you finally see that love shouldn't be a performance. That connection should never feel like a fight for scraps. That being in someone's life should feel like being chosen, not tolerated. Letting go is you stepping off the emotional treadmill where you run and go nowhere. And once you do, you realize how much lighter your life becomes without the weight of someone else's indecision. Ironically, that's often the very moment he starts to notice everything he risked losing, because what once felt guaranteed now feels out of reach. And in that space, he has a choice. Rise to meet your energy or let the distance grow. But the difference now is, your peace doesn't hinge on his choice anymore. Because the moment you let go, you came back home to yourself. You stopped trying to prove your worth and started protecting it. You stopped trying to be someone he'd want and started being someone you're proud of. And that's the energy that either draws a man closer or exposes who was never meant to stay. Either way, you win, because when you let go, what you're really doing is holding on to the one thing that matters most, yourself. When someone knows they have constant access to you, they stop valuing that access. It's human nature. We tend to appreciate what we have to earn, what isn't always readily available, what demands respect in order to be kept. And that's not about playing games, it's about maintaining boundaries and preserving self-respect. When you're always available, always forgiving, always the one initiating, you send a message, whether you mean to or not, that your time, energy, and heart are easy to come by. And over time, that message chips away at the respect in the dynamic. The key isn't to pretend to be distant, it's to genuinely step back from overgiving and start honoring your own space. When you do that, when you stop over-functioning in the relationship, you give him the space to show what he's really capable of. The truth is, people can't feel your absence if they never experience it. When you're constantly filling in the emotional gaps, texting first, keeping the conversation going and making plans, you become the engine driving the connection. But a relationship isn't meant to be carried, it's meant to be co-created. And if you're the only one putting in effort, the other person doesn't get a chance to rise. By stepping back, you create a void. That void gives him a moment to ask himself, do I miss her? Do I value what we had? Was I showing up in a way that matched her energy? That reflection can't happen while you're still holding the space for him. Now, stepping back doesn't mean being cold or manipulative. It doesn't mean playing games or giving someone the silent treatment to punish them. It's an internal shift that says, I am not going to keep feeding a connection that's not feeding me back. It's rooted in self-awareness. You start to notice where you've been overextending, emotionally, mentally, even physically. You realize that love isn't about constantly proving your worth or keeping someone's attention. It's about mutual investment. And when you stop overcompensating, you stop shielding the other person from the consequences of their passivity, this space you create allows the truth to rise. If he genuinely cares, that space will stir something in him. He'll feel your absence not just as a missing person, but as a missing energy, your support, your encouragement, your emotional presence. And that absence becomes a mirror. If he's emotionally mature, he'll realize what he's lost access to and feel the need to reconnect in a more intentional, consistent way. He might reach out with more clarity, more thought, more effort. He may realize he took your kindness for granted, but if he doesn't, that tells you everything you need to know. The beauty of this approach is that you don't have to guess anymore. You're no longer wondering what he would do if. You're seeing it in real time. When you create space and stop chasing, you stop scripting fantasies in your head and start dealing with reality, you get answers. Maybe not the ones you hoped for, but the ones you need. And that clarity is everything, because it allows you to stop fighting for a connection that was never reciprocal and start making room for one that is. What many people don't realize is how deeply attractive self-possession is. When you no longer need someone to choose you in order to feel valuable, you exude a different kind of energy, calm, grounded, magnetic. That's the energy that makes people wake up. That's the energy that makes someone pause and realize what they're missing. Not because you tried to make them feel that way, but because you stopped trying to make them feel anything at all. You simply stood still and let the silence speak. This silence isn't a punishment, it's a boundary. It's the absence of chasing. It's you no longer leaking energy into a black hole. And ironically, it's often the thing that creates the very connection you were hoping for all along. Because it forces both of you to confront what's really there. It asks him to step up or step out, and it invites you to stop waiting and start receiving. Let him notice the difference. Let him feel the shift. Let your absence be your loudest message. Because when someone realizes they no longer have easy access to you, they either become deeply aware of your value or they reveal they never really saw it. Either way, you gain something invaluable, your clarity, your power, and your peace. Sometimes, the greatest power you can step into is emotional detachment, not indifference, but the kind of peace that comes when your happiness is no longer dependent on someone else's behavior. It's that inner knowing that says, I can feel everything without letting it control me. When you're able to release the grip you've had on the outcome, that's when everything begins to shift. Because the energy of attachment, of needing someone to act a certain way, love you a certain way, respond a certain way, is heavy. It leaks anxiety into every interaction. It creates pressure. It turns your presence into a performance, your silence into fear, and their distance into a personal crisis. But when you truly let go, you take back control over the one thing that's always been yours, your peace. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. You stop scripting how things should unfold and start accepting what's actually happening. Instead of needing their text to feel validated, you become curious about their silence. Instead of chasing closure, you become the closure. You learn to stand in the gap between your desire and reality and say, even here, I'm okay. That's not weakness. That's emotional maturity. That's self-leadership. And it's exactly what causes a shift in the dynamic, because suddenly you're not reacting, you're choosing. You're no longer trying to manage their experience of you. You're focused on managing your own energy, your own boundaries, your own path forward. When someone feels you're holding on too tightly, it can create a sense of resistance in them. They may feel overwhelmed, pressured, or even trapped by the intensity of your need for reassurance. But when you ease up, when you step back and reclaim your energy, they start to feel the difference. They're no longer trying to escape your emotional grasp. Instead, they begin to notice the space you've left behind. And in that space, their own feelings start to surface. The things they took for granted become clear. The safety of your presence becomes something they have to earn back, not because you're making them jump through hoops, but because you're no longer offering yourself unconditionally to someone who's not meeting you halfway. Letting go isn't passive, it's incredibly active. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty, to resist the urge to reach out just to feel in control again. It asks you to trust that the right connections won't need to be chased and the wrong ones will fall away no matter how tightly you hold on. That level of trust doesn't come easily, especially when your heart is invested. But it's the kind of trust that transforms your dating life. It frees you from obsession, from rumination, from self-blame, and it makes your presence more powerful because now you're choosing to stay only where you feel seen, safe, and respected. The irony is that the moment you emotionally release someone, you often create the exact environment they need to step up. Your detachment becomes the wake-up call. They sense the shift, not in words, but in energy. You're no longer over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-compensating. You're not baiting them with attention. You're not trying to spark a reaction. You've simply returned your focus to your own life. And nothing is more attractive than someone who has learned to pour back into themselves. This shift doesn't just affect them, it changes you. You stop living in reaction to someone else's emotional temperature. You stop waking up wondering how they feel and start asking how you feel. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself every day. That energy is potent. It moves you from anxious to anchored, from needy to neutral, from proving to powerful. You carry yourself differently, speak differently, even attract differently, because you're no longer orbiting someone else's indecision. You've come home to yourself. In this state, if he wants to reach out, he will. If he values the connection, he'll make it known. And if he doesn't, you won't collapse. You'll keep moving. That's the beauty of detachment. It doesn't numb you, it strengthens you. It gives you clarity that no amount of texting, guessing, or overanalyzing ever could. You're no longer fighting for a seat at someone else's table. You're building your own table and trusting that the right person will want to sit with you there. Not because you chased them, but because you let go. And in that release, you made room for something better, either their evolved presence or your own expansion without them. Either way, you win. When you stop trying to remind someone of your worth, that's when they start to remember it on their own. The truth is, constant reminders of how good you are, how loving, patient, understanding, loyal, don't make someone appreciate you more. In fact, they often create the opposite effect. Because the more effort you put into proving your value, the more someone subconsciously believes they don't have to work to earn it. It's like handing someone a priceless gift every day, hoping they'll one day see how special it is, when all they learn is that they don't have to do anything to keep receiving it. Real appreciation begins in absence. It begins when the source of peace, affection, and consistency they once had to do nothing for is no longer within reach. It begins when you stop explaining and start exiting. And when you finally withdraw your energy, not in a game-playing way, but in a quiet, self-respecting way, you change the emotional atmosphere. You're no longer reacting to crumbs. You're no longer responding to late-night messages or half-hearted attempts to keep you just interested enough. You stop being a placeholder. And suddenly that person has to face the silence. They have to sit with the echo of what they took for granted. And sometimes that silence speaks louder than anything you could have said. Because while words can be ignored or rationalized away, absence is felt deeply, viscerally, and it has a way of forcing people to confront their own behavior in a way your presence never could. This is where the regret begins to seed itself, not because you tried to make them feel it, but because you finally stopped trying to prevent it. You removed the safety net, you stopped managing their emotions and started managing your boundaries. And when someone realizes that your love, your effort, your investment was never guaranteed, that it was given freely but could be withdrawn when not respected, that's when the internal shift happens. That's when their memory becomes sharper, their mind more reflective, their heart more honest. They start replaying the times you stayed when you could have walked, the patience you gave when they were inconsistent, the way you tried even when they didn't match your effort. And regret begins to take root not because you reminded them, but because you stopped. This isn't about vengeance or making someone pay. It's about reclaiming your dignity. It's about recognizing that real value doesn't announce itself repeatedly. It lets its absence do the talking. It's trusting that if someone can't appreciate what's in front of them, removing it is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Because when you leave, you make room for either their growth or your peace. And both outcomes are better than staying stuck in a dynamic where you're always the one trying harder. This act of walking away isn't just for them to feel the void. It's for you to finally feel the freedom. Freedom from begging someone to see what's obvious. Freedom from the emotional fatigue of explaining your heart. Freedom from tying your worth to someone else's readiness to receive it. And ironically, this is often the moment where people start showing up. Not always, and not always in the way you want, but often enough to prove the point. When you stop reminding someone of what they're losing, they start realizing what they had. Because people don't change when you keep showing up regardless of how they treat you. They change when your absence makes them question why you're no longer there. That's when they feel the gap you used to fill. That's when they understand that love isn't guaranteed. It's reciprocal. And if they can't match your energy, they lose access to it. But here's the deeper truth. Even if they don't come back, even if they never fully grasp what they lost, you still win. Because in stepping back, you step into yourself. You stop leaking your power into a one-sided connection. You stop negotiating your self-worth. You start healing, growing, becoming whole again, not through their acknowledgement, but through your own. And that shift, that transformation is irreversible. You may miss them, you may still care, but you'll never chase again. Not because you're bitter, but because you finally know your worth doesn't need to be repeated, it just needs to be honored. When you finally stop waiting for someone to step up, they're forced to confront whether they ever intended to. One of the most quietly powerful decisions you can make is to stop holding space for someone who keeps filling it with uncertainty. You wait, you hope, you try to be patient. You tell yourself maybe they're just not ready, maybe they need more time, maybe if you're understanding enough, loving enough, consistent enough, they'll come around. But every time you pause your own emotional needs to accommodate their indecision, you're silently teaching them that you're okay being an option. And the truth is, someone who believes you'll always be there has no real urgency to show up differently. There's no incentive to grow, no need to rise, because the cost of staying the same doesn't feel real to them. But when you finally stop waiting, when you reclaim that energy, redirect it inward and walk forward, they feel that cost in full. Letting go doesn't always mean slamming the door. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's that gradual pullback of your attention, your responsiveness, your emotional availability. It's not revenge, it's reality. You can't keep your life on hold for someone who's unsure about giving you a real place in theirs. At first, they might not notice. They might think you're just busy, or that this is another cycle you'll eventually return from. But over time, your consistency, something they took for granted, becomes noticeably absent. And that absence changes things. It challenges the dynamic they were comfortable in. It forces them to reevaluate what your presence meant. Because while they were on the fence, you were always emotionally all in. And now for the first time, the scales are tipping. When someone who was once sure of your availability begins to feel the discomfort of your detachment, it can trigger one of two responses. They either step up or step out. And while that truth may be painful, it's also clarifying. The space you created by walking away becomes a mirror. It shows them not just who you were, but who they weren't. It exposes the gaps in their effort, the laziness in their love, the selfishness in their comfort. And for the first time, they're not just confronted with what they had in you. They're confronted with the fact that they might have lost it. That's where regret is born, not in your pleas or your patience, but in your absence, in the silence that used to be filled with your support, your warmth, your consistent showing up. And that regret is something no conversation, no second chance, no "I miss you" text can undo if too much time passes without action. But the real shift isn't in them, it's in you. Because the moment you stop waiting, you reclaim your identity. You stop living on emotional standby. You begin pouring into the people, passions, and practices that return your energy. You begin thriving in ways that remind you your worth was never dependent on whether or not they figured it out. And ironically, that's when they often circle back, when your glow returns, when your peace deepens, when they sense that they no longer have the same emotional grip on you. But by then, something inside you has changed. You've tasted the peace that comes from no longer waiting for someone to decide you're enough. And that taste is hard to forget. This isn't about playing hard to get, it's about becoming hard to forget. And not because you forced anyone to remember you, but because your absence made them realize what they let go. When you stop waiting, you stop making excuses. You stop extending deadlines for growth they never committed to. You stop hoping for change that never came. And instead, you make space for someone who's ready now, not someday. For someone who doesn't make you guess, doesn't make you wait, doesn't make you question whether love should feel this uncertain. And here's the most empowering part. When you stop waiting, even if they never come around, you do. You come back to your strength, your joy, your clarity. You return to the version of you that doesn't sit on emotional sidelines, waiting for someone else's play. And when you lead with that energy, you no longer chase potential, you attract presence. You no longer hope for a future that only exists in your imagination. You align with someone who shows up now, fully, freely, fearlessly, because the person who's meant for you won't need you to wait. They'll meet you where you are. When you finally stop chasing, something magical happens. You shift the entire dynamic. The person who once felt in control now starts to feel your absence in a way that unsettles them. Because when you stop trying to make it work, when you stop checking in, over-explaining, proving your worth, or showing them just how good you'd be for them, you remove the comfort they've come to rely on. And what they're left with is silence, an echo of what used to be, your energy constantly reassuring them, affirming them, anchoring them. Most people don't realize what they have when it's offered endlessly. They only realize it when it's gone. And it's in that void, that absence, that reflection begins. Not because you begged or performed, but because you withdrew. And in doing so, you gave them the opportunity to miss you, to recognize you not as an option, but as a loss. We've been conditioned to think that effort equals love, that if we just try a little harder, prove ourselves a little more, hang on just a little longer, it will finally click for them. But people don't fall in love with effort, they fall in love with presence, energy, alignment. And ironically, when you stop giving all of yourself to someone who hasn't earned it, you become more attractive, not because you're trying to manipulate, but because you're finally protecting your essence. When you let go emotionally, even while still physically around, the air shifts. Your eyes stop asking for validation. Your texts stop chasing connection. Your plans stop revolving around their availability. And that shift, it's palpable. They may not say anything at first, but they feel it. Suddenly your light feels further away. The certainty they took for granted is now in question, and people crave what they fear they've lost more than what they think they can always have. Letting go doesn't just teach them a lesson, it teaches you one too. It teaches you that your peace matters more than potential, that silence can be more powerful than any monologue about your feelings, that not responding is sometimes the loudest message you can send. You begin to realize that love isn't supposed to feel like convincing someone to stay. It's not meant to be a one-sided effort, an uphill battle, or a daily test of how much you're willing to bend. True connection feels mutual, safe, expansive, and when you remove yourself from the dynamic of proving and pleading, you create space for something better. Sometimes they rise to meet you in that space, sometimes they don't, but either way you win because you've stopped abandoning yourself to hold on to someone who doesn't fully see you. If he starts holding on after you've let go, it means he's finally recognizing your value. But you don't wait around hoping for that. That's not the point. The point is that your worth isn't determined by someone else waking up and realizing it. It's determined by the moment you stop settling. When he feels the absence of your emotional investment, he may realize how much it meant. He may come back more engaged, more present, more committed. But here's the question. By then, will you still want what he's offering? Because something powerful happens when you stop trying so hard. You stop overvaluing the wrong person. You stop looking at someone's potential and start seeing their reality. And often, that clarity shows you weren't actually losing love. You were losing your illusion of it. Walking away isn't always about finality, it's about freedom. Freedom to see who shows up when you're no longer making it easy for them. Freedom to observe who values you without your constant effort. And freedom to open your heart to something healthier, more balanced, more worthy of your time. So if he starts holding on after you've let go, let that be his moment of clarity, not your reason to return. Don't go back just because he finally noticed your absence. Go back only if he shows up with actions, consistency, and a renewed effort that matches your worth. And if he doesn't, then let him miss you. Let him live with the space you used to fill so generously, because you've got better things to do than prove your value to someone who couldn't see it the first time around. You're not just letting go, you're rising. And that, more than anything, is what changes the game. At the heart of all this is a simple truth. When you stop chasing, stop overgiving, and start valuing yourself first, everything changes. Letting go isn't about losing. It's about reclaiming your power, your peace, and your worth. It's about creating the space for someone who truly sees you, respects you, and holds you with the care you deserve. When you release the need to control their feelings or their actions, you free yourself to attract genuine connection. And if he starts holding on after you've let go, that's a sign not just of his realization, but of your growth. Because you've learned that love isn't about holding on desperately. It's about knowing when to walk away with grace and confidence, trusting that what's meant for you will never require you to lose yourself. So stand tall, honor your worth, and remember, the moment you let go, you open the door to something better.